Welcome to My Perfect Path, where we dive deep into the lives of high achievers, exploring their early years and pivotal decisions that have shaped their unique paths to success. Get ready to unravel the secret of how they braved career shifts and made daring decisions with limited knowledge and resources. If you've ever wondered how to navigate your life and career best, you're in the right place. Today's episode, My Purposeful Path, features a very special guest, Eden Warner. Eden's career journey is nothing short of inspiring. He has worn many hats, from engineering to business to finance, across multiple industries before launching his own startup. Eden worked at Intel, Northrop Grumman, ARCO, Fandango, which are just some of his career highlights. Now, he's building his own startup as CEO. I'm really excited to share today's episode to learn how we can make our own career decisions after listening to Eden's stories on the twists and turns in his career. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome to My Perfect Path, the podcast where we uncover the unique journeys of adults who are shaping their own definitions of success. I'm your host, Daniel, and today we have a truly inspiring guest joining us. Eden, welcome to My Perfect Path. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Would this be your first time on a podcast?
Yes, it is. This is my inaugural podcast.
I've seen that you've actually done interviews with other organizations as well. I've seen Bridge. How was your experience there?
No, it was good. I mean, it was just a typical kind of interview, and it was a little free-flowing, but it was good, and it served its purpose in terms of helping to guide him.
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty similar today. My first question to kick us off would be, from a high level, what were some of the roles that you've had in the past? I understand that you've had many, so I want to kind of set up context for the listeners.
Okay, sounds good. So I was a trained engineer. I did management in the engineering field. Then I got my MBA, came out and had a finance degree, went into finance as an analyst, then did management roles in finance, was the head of a plant, which I can go into detail later, was the head of investor relations for a Fortune 50 company, then went to a startup as a CFO, another startup as a CFO/COO, and then lots of independent consulting around that. And I'm doing another startup as a CEO.
Wow. I mean, that's a very big,
yes,
big breadth roles there. I think that's like mainly the reason I want to have this episode with you, is that we want to learn from how you made those decisions and how you're advancing your career.
Right.
So the episode today is called My Purposeful Path. Could you share with us why you chose that adjective specifically?
Yeah, sure. In every one of my steps that I've taken, there's been a point where I had to stop and really think of what I wanted next. And sometimes there were things that looked like they were much better, and they could be more lucrative, it might seem in the short term, but they didn't fit in line with the purpose of what I wanted to do long term. And so because of that is the reason I chose Purposeful, because it's not one path, but each time there were decision points, I used my purpose and where I thought I wanted to go to help make those decisions.
I see. To kind of also tell the listeners what you're currently doing, what are you working on recently, and what's your role right now?
I'm doing another startup. It's a mobile marketing platform that uses video, music clips, and native texting to create vignettes. But the vignettes are driven by an AI backend. So it allows you to quickly create this vignette and send it to a friend. And it's a marketing tool because you can use a piece of content that's sent to you, wrap it with music or pictures that is useful for the friend, and give it something more meaning than it would have otherwise. So it allows it both for acquisition of new phone numbers and acquisition of people. So we're working on that now, where we have a beta that's already built. We're working on funding to do our production back end.
Wow.
And just because I like to be busy, I'm also training to be a coach, an executive coach.
Oh, I see. Wow. I think I've also saw like you were doing some consulting as well.
Yes.
Is that related to the coaching, or is that something else?
Now the consulting has really morphed into, the company's called Treever. So Treever is where my consulting work is really focused now. I mean, I've done other consulting that was around mobile marketing, around many different pieces around finance and helping small companies, mainly around small and emergent companies. But now most of that effort is in Treever.
I see. Is your role kind of like the CEO or the CFO?
It's the CEO.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I have a business partner for Treever. He actually thought up the idea, but he's much more of a creative, and he is someone that was much more of a business person to make this something real and tangible. So I work as a CEO, and he has a role as a creative lead as we move forward to build this out.
Gotcha. I think for the listeners that are kind of focusing on entrepreneurship, actually me too. So
Right.
I think we're going to learn a lot today. One of the questions that I want to ask you from your early influences is, can you share a little bit about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Oh, sure.
Maybe your background. And we just want to know if we can relate to any of these things. You know, some people might come from different places.
Right. So I'm first generation American. Both my parents are from Barbados in the West Indies. It's an interesting track, and I'll touch on this later on because we'll probably talk about schooling at some point. But all of my mom and her three main sisters all came to Cambridge, Massachusetts, because that's where the uncle that sent them brought them to the United States. And then they moved from there to different places, and my mom ended up in New Jersey. My parents split when I was very young, and so my mom is who mainly raised me in New Jersey. And so I grew up in New Jersey, certainly not in the best of neighborhoods and the best of areas, but my mom put herself through school, became a registered nurse, moved us out of that neighborhood, moved us into better neighborhoods. My schooling was all public school until I got to 10th grade. And in 10th grade, I went to a parochial school, and that kind of changed my trajectory. I mean, I was always a really good student, but now I started to see what I could really do.
I see. Were there any particular experiences or individuals that influenced your direction at a young age?
I would say that was interesting. I started to play the clarinet when I was in sixth grade. And a year later, I met a gentleman who played the sax, and he got me into playing the sax. And I would go to his house every day to practice the sax. And he taught me what it was like to really commit to something. Because I could play the clarinet decent. You know, I took classes at school and I would practice a little bit, but he made it a regimen. Like I had to promise him I came every single day and I put time into playing the sax.
Sort of like an accountability partner?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I learned at a very young age, if you want to do something well, you should be committed to putting the time in. And so for everything I did, I felt you just don't put your toe in the water. You know, if you really want to get the most out of it, you have to put real time in. And there's certain things that you might do easy. And so it's tempting to just go, well, I can do this well easily, so I don't need to put that much effort in. But you'll always see this huge benefit when you truly commit to wanting to do something. So that was an important influence for me.
You know, that does remind me of, I think at one point in middle school, or early middle school, I realized that actually studying for a test brings good results.
Yes.
It's a revelation. It was a revelation for me.
Right.
But I realized if I memorize these things or if I understand these things well, like I actually get a good score. I think that was a key moment. I think a lot of us have that kind of changes us. That's kind of interesting that you learned it from an instrument.
Yes, exactly. And I've used that with my children to tell them learning to get discipline is not necessarily because you are studying for a test. There's life outside of the academics that can teach you about discipline even better. And I've always thought music was the one because you can never say, I've practiced enough.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Never, those words don't, because it's not like you're doing a sport even. Even a sport, you need to practice more, but you could do it and suppose you want to dunk. And once you dunk, you go, okay, I can dunk. But there's never going to be a dunk playing an instrument.
Yeah.
You just will be good and you could be better.
It's always better.
It's always better.
It's one of those things, yeah. So maybe, and we can go into clarinet as well, but was there anything that you were very passionate about ever since you were young? Maybe technology, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I used to do models. So I would build just regular plastic models, but it morphed into doing radio control models. Oh, right. And so at a very young age, for what this was, I was in, everything happened around 7th grade. I was in middle school, and I had a really good friend of mine, and both of us were really interested in models, and we decided we were going to build N-scale ships.
Oh, okay.
So that's 1/130th scale. So that's a big size. If you're going to build something like a cruiser or a battleship, it's over 5 feet long.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
So we both committed to building these boats. And so I literally started building my boat, which was a heavy cruiser called the Canberra. I started building this in 7th grade, and I finished it in high school in 12th grade.
Wow.
And I built it out of balsa wood, buying little strips of balsa wood at a time, and all of it from a small 6-inch drawing in Jane's Fighting Ships. So I used that drawing and scaled it up and built this 5-foot boat and finally put it in the water, fully working, when I was a senior in high school.
Oh, it was functional,
It was
too.
functional. It was radio controlled.
Oh, wow.
So it had full gearbox that geared the one motor into 4 propellers, and it had 2 rudders, and it had missiles that fired that were bottle rockets.
Wow,
And
that's
it
amazing.
had turning radar and all of these things.
My question would be, how did you find a body of water that you could fit this into?
Well, there were lakes in my area, which is not like Los Angeles, but in my area in New Jersey, I grew up in New Jersey, there were lots of lakes that were man-made.
Gotcha.
And so there were lots of people that would do sailboats and stuff like that. But it was fun for us to bring out our boat. When I finally brought that boat out and put it in the water and to see all these kids coming around and going, oh my God, what is that? It was, but I would be in the house for hours and hours, and my mom's like, you need to get out of the house. And I was like, yes, but I'm trying to get this thing done. But I will tell you one quick story about that. So like I said, I built the whole thing from a 6-inch drawing. What I didn't realize was that was a waterline drawing. So it didn't show what was underneath the waterline. So I find a model of the boat, and it has a hull, and I go, oh, I got how the hull is, and I build it based on that hull. Later on, I finally find real plans for it and find out the bottom of that model was completely wrong. It's nothing like what the boat is. It's flat bottom, and the boat's not really flat bottom. And so I ripped the whole hull apart and rebuilt it.
Oh my gosh,
that's
dedication
yes,
right
exactly.
there.
So it was a little crazy, but it was driving me crazy that it was not the right
it wasn't
hull.
accurate.
It wasn't accurate. And so I had to fix it.
Wow, I think that says a lot about you.
Yes.
And I think it definitely shows what kind of tenacity you need for these things. Actually, that's a good segue to early 20s in your career. You went to MIT?
Yes.
And what did you study there?
I studied aerospace engineering.
I see. Do you think that came from that similar interest area?
Right, because I also did model planes, but I didn't fly them as much as I ran the boat. So when I got time to go to school, I was thinking between naval architecture and aerospace engineering. And MIT is one of the few schools that actually had a major in naval architecture.
In naval architecture.
But I decided that aerospace made more sense for just opportunities and everything else. So at MIT, it's not really called aerospace, it's aeronautics and astronautics. And so you can do air breathing, which is airplanes, or you can do non-air breathing, which is rockets and spacecraft. Or you could just do a mixture of both, which is what I did.
I see. I want to ask you, I guess, early in your 20s, were there some pivotal choices that you faced? Maybe what companies you wanted to apply to, what kind of role you wanted to transition into, things like that?
So I obviously graduated or was ready to graduate to be an aerospace engineer. So the good thing about MIT is a ton of companies come to MIT. So it's not like you had to search a lot. There were a ton there. And the question was, what part of the country would I really want to be in? And I remember the first place that came was Goodyear Aerospace, and they were in Ohio. And I said, there's no way I'm going to go work in Ohio. But this is a great company to go practice my interviewing on. So I went and I practiced that. But then later on, the final 3 choices for me were Boeing in Seattle, Northrop in LA, and Martin Marietta in Florida. And I remember each one had their different pitches for why. But what I loved about Northrop, this is one of the early times I had to make a decision like this, right, was that I was going to go to a research and development group. And I felt if I was going to go someplace and really start to apply what I had learned, because I had mainly focused on control theory, so how to control vehicles, and I'd done a lot in modern control theory. And I said, if I go to these other places, if I go to Boeing and I work on some aircraft, or if I go to Martin Marietta and work on some missile, I'm not going to do state-of-the-art modern control theory. But Northrop was promising me the opportunity to do that.
I see.
The biggest issue was I lived in New Jersey. I'd never been west of Pennsylvania, and now I was going to go to the West Coast. I had no family there. I have no connection, no linkage. So that was a decision. Are you going to move that far away from family because the job makes sense? And the way I convinced myself, which is something I will say I've done throughout my career, is to recognize every decision has time as part of the decision. And the biggest mistake you make is not to think that time is also part of your decision. That you think when you make this decision, it's for all time. That's a mistake people make all the time. When if you stop and go, what I said to myself is, I'm going to do it for 2 years. As soon as I said that, it became easy to go do it. And even if it wasn't going to be for 2 years, it allowed me to say, yeah, I could do it for 2 years. I can go anywhere for 2 years. And so make the decision, put it in a box, and then make the best decision in that box. And the best decision in that box was to go to Northrop. So that's how I went to Northrop.
I really like that, and I agree with that because I think sometimes we put too much pressure, and if you have the timeline as permanent, it becomes a much heavier decision.
Exactly.
And your apartment leases are it goes it's over in a year. It's okay. You can move back.
Right. And the good thing was this is the glory of a big company. They were going to move me, take care of all my moving to move out there. Funny quick story. So I had a car, and they were going to move my car as well. And I had my 5-foot ship. And I said, I want to take my ship with me. And they said, oh, that would take special crating and everything else. And then all of a sudden, the guy who was moving me goes, don't you have a car? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, you could just put it in the car. And I went, brilliant. So that's how my ship was moved, was moved in the car, because the car wasn't even put on a car carrier. They put it inside the biggest trailer I've ever seen. So they put all my belongings,
including
and my car, in the trailer, and it probably took up a third of the trailer. It was massive. So anyway, and they moved me all the way out, and I went, well, if I find a company to move me back, I'll be fine.
There we go. We have a moving tip as well. Just get a big enough box.
That's exactly.
Just take everything.
So that ended up being, one of the big first decisions, thinking I was going to come to LA for 2 years, and I literally never left.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of decisions in between there, and other times I thought I was going to leave, but I've never left since.
So the 2-year decision became forever.
Right. It became forever, but it was not the same forever.
True.
It was a ton of different pieces, but it still ended up being in LA.
I see. When you made that decision specifically, did you feel a lot of uncertainty and fear, or was it more of an excitement? And
they were both. I mean, because I had never been that far away from family. And so there was always that, suppose something happens, there's no lifeline at all, because it's not like there's anyone I know that was in LA. It literally was me. And I'm like, well, you get to meet people, and hopefully that'll be fine. But I will admit that when I got on that plane to fly out here, yes, there was a lot of trepidation. Yeah, but once you get here and you start to meet people, and that starts to go away. But it was a fair amount.
Was there something that you did specifically to meet more people and increase your network here?
Well, I started playing volleyball when I was a senior in college. And so when I came out here, I forgot, there was one person in my class came out to California as well, and he played volleyball.
Perfect.
And so he and I would start to get together. And so I at least had this one friend that I knew. And because of volleyball, I would go to classes and stuff like that. So I started meeting a ton of people around the circle of volleyball. And that ended up being my main place for starting to really know folks out here in LA.
I think volleyball is a great sport to do that. It's a very team-dependent sport. You really have to rely on your teammates.
Yeah.
I personally played in high school as well.
Oh, you did?
So there's a bit of a connection point there. I guess we can kind of jump into more of your what happened afterwards.
Right.
So after your engineering career, I understand you went to UCLA Anderson for your MBA.
Right.
How did you make that decision? And you also did it part-time while working, is that true?
No, I did it full-time while working part-time. So,
oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. So here, you go to a company and you're going to do engineering. You don't really know what that means. You just know you're going to work in engineering. And so for the first 2 years I was there, I was in this research and development group, like I said. And I was the only person I knew of my friends and all that left MIT who actually landed someplace and was doing what he had done in school.
So you mean doing something that you've studied very specifically?
Yes. So we were actually using modern control theory to try to control a fictitious vehicle. It took a vehicle, put a bunch of effectors on it, and said, can we control it better using modern control theory. And just so folks understand, only thing modern control theory means is normally you have the latitude of a plane that you control and the longitude of a plane you control. So you move rudders up and down, you move ailerons to go to the side, and those are just decoupled loops that you use to move the plane or the vehicle around. Modern control theory says when I move my stabilizer, it also gives me a little bit of force in the latitude as well as longitude. So why don't we take advantage of that and make sure that we use that force when we're calculating how we're going to use other things to move in the lateral. So it
takes into consideration more factors.
Right. And so that hadn't really been implemented before. And so we were trying to see, could we do that with this vehicle that had a ton of different types of effectors that had different forces on it? And the answer was somewhat. One axis, you got more benefit from it. The other axis was unstable. And so we eventually had to just zero out all of the modern control pieces for that axis. But anyway, so I did get to do that. And that was fun. And then I was tapped and I had to move to this secret project. And it was literally a place with no windows. And the funny thing is I now can say what it was, but for the longest time I couldn't even say one hint of what it was at all.
I see.
And if I traveled and I was going to a big city, I could say where I was going. But if I was going someplace that probably that's the only thing it could be there, I couldn't tell it. Even I couldn't tell my girlfriend where I was going. I couldn't say anything. I could tell my mom where I was going. I just had to
That would have
go.
looked really suspicious though with your from your family and friends.
Yes, exactly. So I went to that project and I went there as a flight control engineer. I went to a flight control group. And when I got to the group, they realized they had no one that could do a particular subsystem, which were the actuators for the vehicle. So I became an actuator expert quickly. So started working on that with the vendors. And that's what tapped me to start thinking about something different. I kept thinking, where's this going to go? Because engineers want you to get more and more specific as you go up. That didn't really feel like the right way for me. But when we're dealing with the subcontractor for actuation, I started dealing with contracts. And when I started doing that, I actually found myself kind of intrigued by it. I liked it. I liked the business terms around it. I liked setting those terms, setting those pieces of it. But I still was thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And here comes another subsystem, which is navigation. So I had a unique situation where it was this older gentleman who was a navigation expert, but he was a very surly gentleman. He couldn't communicate to anyone. He was very mean. And I started working under him. And it quickly became obvious to my manager that, well, Eden's the only one that can go into the meetings and actually have conversations because Joe is just not a nice guy. But Joe liked me because I picked up on things quickly. And his big thing is he had no tolerance for dumb people. That was his problem. So if anyone did anything that he thought was dumb, he was more than happy to tell you that was dumb, which is not a great way to get people to do things. And so I started working under his tutelage and became a navigation expert. But again, I started working with our sub-vendor about the navigation system. And this was early GPS. This is when GPS was not even known, and we were using it for our system. And again, setting the parameters, doing the business terms started to get me interested. And that's when I started to decide business school would make sense for me. And decision around that was, do I want to continue to stay in engineering or do I want to get out of engineering? And I decided I wanted to get out of engineering. And that decision meant I couldn't go to business school and rack up a ton of debt and then make a decision just based on paying off the debt. That I wanted this to be a change, and I wanted to be a change to what I wanted to do, not just what I needed to do. And so that's limited the space of the schools I would look at. I wanted a top 10 school because it's a business degree and you have no other way to prove that you're really good at it unless you go to a top 10 school. There's only 2 schools that really fit the bill in terms of not racking up a lot of debt, being a top 10 school, and then actually, I should say, not racking up a lot of debt and being a top 10 school is really only one. And that was UCLA. Because it was top 10, it was in-state tuition, which was really cheap. And as a bonus, if I could work at my old company, my living expenses would not cause me debt either.
Right. So you would maybe equal out, or at least sustainable to some extent.
And so that was why it became my number one choice. So when I got in there, I was clear that I was going to go there. I wasn't going to go to Stanford because I would be in so much debt that I would
very
only
conscious decision.
Yes. So UCLA fit the bill, and I worked 20 hours a week at Northrop. I didn't say that. Northrop was the company I went to. I worked 20 hours a week at Northrop while I went full-time school at UCLA.
So I have two questions. One is, when you were working, were you always thinking about how you're going to craft your career? Like, were you always asking yourself constantly, like, what am I going to do after this?
No.
Were you that kind of person?
No. I would periodically ask that question. My belief always was, I can't get anywhere if I don't do what I'm doing well. So I wouldn't be constantly thinking about the next thing. I would be mostly thinking about doing what I was doing well. The thing that I learned as time went on was not only to do what I do well, but to keep my eyes open for other things that the company needs done and doing it.
I see.
That became such a powerful tool in a big company because there's always gaps. There's always things that need to get done, and people are trying to figure out who can do it. And if you just jump in and do it, people just love that. They love the initiative. They love the fact you do it. And quite frankly, it makes your job more interesting too because it's new stuff. And so that's where my focus was. And I figured what I do next would come when it needs to come. And then I would have laid a groundwork that makes it easy to go do that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I guess one thing that I also like in the company I work for is we focus a lot about ownership, right? And there were some people actually even calling it extreme ownership, right? So even if it's not your area of the code base, or even if you don't own that part of the service or something like that, the software, we would kind of dive into other people's code and go in and dive deep and find out what the issue is and root cause it, even if it's not our responsibility technically, right? And I think that kind of looking for spaces that will increase your value is an important skill to have overall.
Yep, indeed. So that's why I would say I wasn't constantly doing that, but I certainly was purposeful in thinking through, like my biggest thing was I don't want to do something too long. That's always my thought process. Now, I might have not be thinking what's next, but I know I'm not doing this long. So at some point, I'm going to have moments where I go, okay, since I know I'm not doing this wrong, what am I going to do next? So that's kind of how it was driven for me. So when I was in business school, they offered me, this is an example of being purposeful, right? So after my first year, I had a secret clearance. So if I left at all, anytime I would lose my clearance. So in the summer, I knew I needed to get a job that was more in line with what I wanted to do next. So I got a summer internship, and I went to my boss, and I went, I've got a summer internship. I guess that's the end of this working because I'm going to be doing that for the summer. And he said, well, I would love to have you back in the fall. Is there any way that we could have you still work in the summer? And I go, I'm working full time. I'm not spending my summer working a lot. I said, I can give you 8 hours a week. And he goes, we could do that.
Wow.
So for the summer, I worked 8 hours a week. I had a project. I built a C-state model for the vehicle we were doing so we could use it for simulations. And I worked at ARCO as an intern for the summer.
That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask. You worked at ARCO, and this time you weren't an engineer.
No.
This was after your MBA.
This is actually first as an intern, so it's between first and second year as my MBA as a finance person.
I see. We can actually start from there, I guess. The beginning of your career at ARCO and how that's transformed over time.
Right. Sure. So I came there as an intern. I worked in a small operating company within the transportation division. So ARCO had a division that did mainly pipelines and ships. They had like a big fleet of ships, mainly to move oil from Alaska North Slope down to their 2 refineries on the West Coast. And then the pipelines to move both crude and gasoline product wherever they needed to go. So this was a small pipeline company. And I was put in that company. And the main reason I wanted to take it was when I went and interviewed with the person, he had a stack on his desk. And he goes, if you come here, these are my projects that my analysts need to do. And I'm just going to grab one of these and give it to you. So I'm not making up anything new for you. It's just going to be a project we need to do. So I love that. So I went there, and he gave me one of those projects. And
sorry to interrupt, but so like the stack of projects, what do you mean you liked what that was?
I liked the one he gave that he chose for me. The one that he selected for me, I liked. When he first said it, I liked the fact that these were projects that his analysts were actually going to do. That he wasn't making up something for the intern who's coming in.
Oh,
it was real.
as an intern.
It was real business that they needed done. So I loved that. And then once I got there and he told me what it was, I saw the value in it, and they really didn't have an answer. So
wow.
and it required some real sleuth work as well as some statistical work to figure out what was going on. And it was how to predict their main pipeline coming from the San Joaquin Valley, how much oil there would be on that. And sometimes it would be chock full, and other times it was barely empty, and they really had no way to predict it. And so they were hoping someone could put together a model that would help them better predict it.
So it sounds like you got like a really good experience out of that internship.
Yeah. Yes. So it ended up being great. What I actually developed from them taught them a lot about what was actually going on. And in that process, I think what made them think I would be great was that there's a gentleman who was like their crude oil expert at ARCO. And I tracked down who he was and went and interviewed him. Wow. And then used that information. And so when my boss was like, so I heard you went downtown. What'd you go downtown for? I said, I got a meeting with Alan Murray, and I met with Alan Murray. He goes, you met with Alan Murray? And I go, yeah, well, I wanted to get a better understanding on flows. He goes, very good.
Very good.
So the project was great. They offered me a full-time position. At the end of the day, cut to the chase, my final decision was between Intel and ARCO. And the gentleman I knew that from MIT and also knew at Anderson, who had worked at ARCO while I was making this decision. And while I was making the decision, he got an offer to move to Intel. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens Intel was trying to get me as well. And I remember, because this is part of this decision process, thought process, in the middle of my interview at Intel, one of my interviews, the CFO walks into the room. And the controller who's giving me the interview kind of loses her train of thought because the CFO walks in the room. And he goes, well, since she's having an issue, I'll just start asking you questions. So he starts asking me questions, and I'm answering his questions. And I guess he was impressed because he said he was really happy to meet me. He laughed, whatever. They made an offer for me. And I told them that at the end of the day, their offer was a lot less than ARCO's. I said, that's not going to be my only part of my decision process, but you should at least know that. So then they went on a hard sell to tell me why I should want to go to Intel instead. And because of the equity and the valued equity and everything, so I said, yeah, that might be true, but I don't know for certain if it is. And I remember the CFO called me one day and starts trying to explain to me why he knows Chevron, and that's just, it's old and it's stale. That's the oil companies. And I said, I'm not here to defend ARCO, but ARCO's not Chevron. It's a very different beast. And so we've had a lot of talking. At one point, he finally goes, I have a blank sheet of paper in front of me. What is it going to take for you to come to Intel?
That's a very good position to be in.
Yes. And I went, I don't believe you're doing this. And I said to him, what was a fateful piece in terms of being purposeful, right? I said, here's the problem I have. Intel used to be a company run by engineers. Now you're a company run by marketers. You're not a company run by finance people. I said, I hate to say that to you as CFO, but you have, at that time, some ungodly amount of money on the cash on the balance sheet. I said, finance is not the deciding factor for you. It's just where to spend the money is the deciding factor.
I guess what you're saying is the most important, heavy, and impactful part of the company is not the finance department.
Finance is not. I said, but at ARCO, there's no decision that's made at ARCO that doesn't go through finance. Because it's a long lead time. It's really important to make the right decisions based on what financial impact it is. And so for that reason, I think for me, because this gets at a point that you said, I think early on, which is if you're going to work somewhere and you're going to work in a big company, work someplace where decisions are made, because you have to have a skill. Even if you want to rule the world, you need to rule the world starting from one place of expertise. And so have that expertise be someplace that's important in the company, because then you can get to places you want to get to.
So by this point, your internship gave you enough experience to know what finance is. Mm-hmm. And I assume that you really liked it enough to really delve into that career.
Right. Finance was my focus. Finance was my main focus in business school, with operations being my secondary focus. So I was what I thought. So the internship, I would say, more validated it than sparked the thought process. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that it was really like simply fun, or did you feel like it was very engaging?
It was, I keep going back to that word impactful because I just knew that the decisions I was making was important to the company. It wasn't ancillary. It was to the heart of the company. And that drove it more than anything else.
So what was your answer to Intel and everything?
So I told Intel no. I obviously went to ARCO. I remember when I told, because Intel, I told them during the whole process, they recruited well. They put a senior person in charge of each candidate they were trying to get. And I had the corporate controller was my person. And she would call me like almost every other day to see how I was doing, how was the decision process, is there anything else she could tell me, is there someone else I need to speak to, whatever. And when I finally told her no, she goes, I hate you. She goes, no, I'm kidding. She goes, I understand your decision process. Obviously, I wish you were coming to Intel, but I'm going to tell you this. She goes, we love you now, we'll love you later.
Wow.
So you have a year. If any time in the next year you decide ARCO is not the right place, you have a job here. You don't have to wonder. You have a job at Intel. And I was like, that's really powerful.
That's very good. That's a very good deal.
That's well done. So, but I went to ARCO. I went back to that same operating company first. I worked there for a while doing the same kind of work. Then I moved from there to Treasury, which is the corporate entity for ARCO as a whole. And I managed the debt portfolio of ARCO, which was at that time $6 to $7 billion. And whatever was going on, we had some environmental things around it that I had to deal with. I had to do some stuff around hedging. So I did a whole bunch of different things in that space. And then half a year in, a special project opened up. There was a gentleman who was assigned to efforts that ARCO was doing to open up in China and on the downstream parts, so like the gasoline and other parts of the refining process. And he was leaving, and they tapped me to take his spot, which is a big, big deal. So pack my bags. I'm going to go to China, and the idea is you're going to be there probably 2 to 1. So maybe 4 weeks there, 2 weeks back, and then it might increase after that. But it's a 2-year stint at least doing this. And I went to do that. and a quick story is within 6 months, the deal fell apart. That was the end of that. I came back to LA, and then I got dispatched to Australia for a deal.
Oh, wow, okay.
So the state of Victoria was privatizing all of their power. ARCO had a coal company in Brisbane, Australia. They partnered with 2 energy companies from the US, and they were bidding for power stations. And they lost the first one, and now this was the second one, and I was the finance lead to come in that process. And although I think it was crazy and it was way too expensive, and I remember telling the treasurer, this is crazy, we shouldn't even be in this. He's like, that's not your job. You just have to make sure that you support them as well as possible. Thank God we lost the bid because it was way, way overpriced. But it was it felt just like being an investment banker. You're sleeping on the floor in your suit. You're getting up at 1 a.m, having negotiations with folks about the trust agreements and everything else. It was exciting. And we had some great meals. Melbourne has amazing food. But at the end of the day, thank goodness we didn't get that. And I came back to Treasury. From there, I wanted to manage stuff, so I went off and I managed in the finance. I'm going to run through this in the controllership in one division. And while I was doing that, it was an example of doing other people's work or doing other needs, I'd say, of people's work, but other things that they needed done. The people I did that for had the decision to who would run this important plant down in Wilmington. That is normally a job for engineers coming out of the refinery that they have high hopes for. I was the first finance guy coming down to run that project. And it was a beautiful business. I mean, from $100 million in revenue, it threw off $65 million in cash. And for a manufacturing business, that's pretty amazing.
That's amazing, yeah.
So I won't get into details of it, but I did that. And then I was loving that so much that they tapped me on the shoulder and said, come do investor relations for the company. And so I went kicking and screaming back to corporate and ran investor relations. And that was my last job at ARCO.
I see. So it seems like even within ARCO, you kept expanding your scope.
Yeah.
And they recognized that, they push you forward, and it seems like you were able to get what you needed out of ARCO.
Yes.
What was the next step, and how was the transition, and what, I guess, gave you the, I don't want to say courage, but like what gave you the push to move on from ARCO, especially since I guess they treated you well and they recognize your talent. So what was the decision there?
Well, actually, that's a big one because I was the head of investor relations when ARCO agreed to be bought by BP. BP had bought Amoco about 6 months before, and now they were buying ARCO. And I'm the head of investor relations. And so I ended up flying to London to help prepare everything for the announcement for this and everything for it. But I'm the ultimate redundant, as they use their word, position, right? Because there's a head of investor relations for BP. So I'm assuming I'm going to lead as part of this. But lo and behold, the CEO of BP takes a liking to me because he gets to work with me. I go on the road show to talk to investors. And so he offers me a special assistant job for him, working for him.
Okay.
And it's probably the best job that could have been offered because you literally work hand in hand with the CEO of BP. And the idea is after you do this, almost like a training ground for about 18 months to 2 years, you go off and run one of their biggest business units. But it would require me to now truly commit to being in the oil industry.
I see.
And so the way I looked at it was, this opportunity he was offering to me was amazing. It's world class. But if I do that, then the next step is to do something else to the oil industry. And unless I get there and hate the company, I'm not going to take that spot from someone, that development spot, just to take it, get the experience, and leave the company. I won't do that. So I said, I really don't want to be 5 years at an oil company anymore. Because if I'm 5 more years, I'm an oil person. That's it. I can say I'm something else, but I'm not. I'm an oil person. And so I turned it down.
Wow.
And I took the package because I had the option to take the package because my job was redundant. So I didn't have to take this other job.
Makes sense.
And I took a vacation.
That's amazing.
I took a vacation. And I said, I'm not going to start looking for work till I'm ready to work because I don't want to start saying I'm going to look in and find something and have to end my fun when I'm not ready for it yet. And I remember talking to someone and I said to them, they said, well, why don't you just do this now? I said, no, because the opportunity cost for me right now is my fun and my free time. So you're going to put a dollar amount on that? I don't think you got enough money.
I think if there's any reason to have fun in the middle of your career, you should take it.
Right.
Especially if it's paid for, obviously.
Exactly.
And I feel like from what we just talked about, you wouldn't have taken, did you take the entire time or did you feel like you wanted to get back in?
I took not the entire time. I gave myself a minimum. I said 6 months is my minimum. So after 6 months, I will start looking. And that's what I did. But the beginning of it was a vacation already because they needed me to go to Singapore for this event. And I said, okay, I'll do it. But my time ends while I'm in Singapore. So I'm just going to do some traveling around Southeast Asia, and then I'll come back. and that's what I did. So my vacation started while I was in Singapore, and then I went to Kuala Lumpur and all other. It was great. It was a really good trip. And then I came back and I said in September, because it was March. I said in September will be when I start looking. And lo and behold, as soon as I started looking in September, something came up from a place I didn't expect, which is a gentleman I had hired at ARCO who was from SC. When he left ARCO, he went and worked for Disney. The guy he worked for in Disney got tapped to be the first CEO for Fandango, the movie ticketer.
I see.
So he was working there as an analyst. And he calls me one day and he goes, Eden, we need a CFO. Would you consider this? And I went, no, it's 2001. And I'm going, I'm not going to go to an internet company. I said, you must be kidding me, right? But then he says, well, at least come and find out more. So I came and found out more, and I was like, okay, this is different. It's not just an internet company selling its wares out there where you can have infinite competition that drives down rents. they actually had exclusive relationships with the theaters, so they could sell for the theaters. So you didn't have competition that way. So that's a good model. I like that.
Like the advantages of having an early internet business, like you could get away with those things.
Yeah, and it's like having a brick and mortar. So the exhibitor was your brick and mortar, and you were doing a service for them that was an internet service, but it's for them.
Right,
and only for them.
Coupled,
right. So I said, okay, great. So you're not spending it. And I said, they had deals where they had placement in all the theaters that they were wired in to sell, but they didn't have to pay for that marketing. They just had to buy them and pay for the materials or production, but not the placement. So I said, so you have cheap advertising. That was another big thing with the internet, was people were blowing tons and millions of dollars on internet advertising. And then the last thing was, did they have kids running the company, or was it adults? And actually, there's two other things. And they had adults run the company. And the third was, are the investors in this company trying to just quickly get something up and then try to sell it, or are they really trying to build a business? And equity formed the company. Two VCs got together because they saw what had happened with AOL and Moviefone and said, if we could pull together a consortium of exhibitors, we can create a real business. And so they actually wanted to create a business.
So how was that process for you? Did you go and talk to these people before you joined? And how were you able to do that? I guess They
just reached out. They knew from the gentleman I knew. He told their head of HR, he told the CEO, and he told this other guy that was like a consultant for them that was kind of doing the finance function for them temporarily. And so they reached out to me. But the funny thing is the CEO didn't want to reach out to me yet. I don't know what his issue was, but they're like, we can't lose him. So they secretly met with me and vetted me. And then once he realized that I made sense, then he was happy to talk to me as well. So
I see.
It was interesting because people say, how did you move from oil to selling movie tickets? And I told people, business is business. And yeah, the scale was different, and that's why I love finance, right? Finance was about knowing how to make good financial decisions. Good financial decisions are good financial decisions. It doesn't make a difference if it's oil in the ground or it's processed oil or it's selling movie tickets. It's about making good financial decisions.
It's a core skill that kind of translates.
Right. It's exactly right. Interesting. And it was that for me.
So from Fandango, did you feel like you enjoyed your time there? Did you feel like you grew a lot in that company?
Oh, I did. I grew a ton. I mean, it was my first startup, right? So it was a case of, I thought I asked all the right questions. I knew how much cash they had, what their burn rate is. Didn't know that as soon as I joined them, they were going to quadruple their burn rate and spend a ton of money on advertising, which was insane. So within my first month, I had to have this come to Jesus meeting, as I said, on a Saturday, where I brought all the executives in and told them, you're insane. Mm-hmm. I said, your plan will have you running out of money in 3 months, and you think you're going to raise money, and you've barely sold any ticket. And it's between now and March. And who sells movie tickets between December and March? No one. So I said, the new plan is we have to be able to make it past the summer, because at least the summer is a better time that we can sell tickets, and then raise money and prove that we could sell it. So I said, so given that this is our bogey, we got to cut 40% out of our spend. The good thing is most of the spend was what they were going to do, and they hadn't hired a bunch of people yet, and so we didn't have to fire people. We just had to not spend the money they were going to spend, which is a lot easier decision to make, but they still were kicking and screaming. And we went through a lot. I learned about bankruptcy. I became almost like a bankruptcy attorney. We won in bankruptcy court where no one thinks you could win. So there was a ton that I learned, a ton.
Do you feel like there's a certain type of person or, I guess, innate skill that you need to be in entrepreneurship and like startups?
Yeah, I say a unique capability. I used to always say startups need amoebas, not parameciums. Parameciums have a fixed shape. Mm-hmm. They know what they are, and that's it. Amoebas change shape.
They grow.
And they move, and you need people who can fill gaps, because there always are going to be gaps. And you might need someone to stick their finger in that dike for a little while and decide, is that going to become a big hole, or is that really just a little dike and we don't really need to do something about it? If it becomes a big hole, okay, maybe we need to hire someone to really do that. But in the first analysis, you're not going to run out and hire someone. You need someone who could just do something. And that's what I did at Fandango. I mean, I came in there as a finance guy. And what did I end up doing? I ran sales for a while because we weren't going to sell. I said, we don't need to hire a salesperson yet. Until we wire enough theaters that we have a big enough footprint, we're not going to sell advertising. What we need to do is, I'll be the head of sales. We need to find a person who's got a great personality
Right.
that can just meet people and get to the place that when we actually have something, they can't say no to her. And we found the perfect person for that. She was just amazing. And so by the time we started to sell, she would come in and she goes, oh, just give me a $5,000 sale. And I said, oh, for you, Shelby, of course, we got to give you something, right? And because that was her job. And I said, originally she won't have a commission. We'll pay her more in salary. And once we start to get a real basis of what we could sell, then we'll reduce her salary and give her more on commission. And that worked out great. But I was a salesperson. I had never done sales. I was the head of sales for a year. And all I kept saying to her is, go do what you do. And if you need me to come in, just to come in the meeting and go, yes, I love you too, I'll come in and then you tell me what to say and I'll say what to say and I'll tell you what you need to do to get to a certain level. And it worked out great.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it kind of ties back to what we talked about of, extreme ownership and also looking at where we can have more impact.
Yes.
And really like increasing your impact actually gives you growth at the same time.
Right.
And it seems like it expands your scope and you're able to advance your career that way.
Right. I mean, the old adage used to be for any company that, especially a startup company, is cash is king. And what is the number one thing you're spending cash on? People. So for you to be judicious, you should be really, it should be a big deal for you to add a body. And so you should find every way you can to do it without adding a body until you have to add a body. And today's world is easier because there's software as a service. There's a bunch of things that you can use that help you to do that before you decide, okay, this has to be proprietary or I need someone who's always available. But it should be when you get to that point as opposed to I have this little need, hire a person for it and hope that it grows into that. You can't afford that. That's the kind of stuff that forces people to do these big expansions and these painful contractions. But if you always make it hard to add a body, then you grow. Yeah, you're going to have pinch points at times. You're going to have capacity constraints. That's okay. That's just life. But it's way better to do that than to expect a huge growth and don't get that and then have to start cutting. Because once you start a culture of cutting, you can never get away from it. People just expect it. And then they operate out of fear as opposed to operating out of what's best for the company.
That makes sense. I think I've heard something like hire slow and fire fast.
Yes, exactly.
I think if you hire slow, you actually may not even need to
fire fast. Exactly.
So,
exactly. But that is your best hope for not having to fire fast.
I kind of want to talk about to whom would you not recommend this career, right? So this for people who are maybe dreaming about this entrepreneurship. Right. I know people glorify it and romanticize it.
Right.
To whom would you not recommend this career and say maybe it's not for you?
Right. That's a good question. Some of the quick thoughts are someone who thinks that they only do one thing. Like, given what I just said, you think that's a natural thing. If there's just one thing that they're good at and that's what they think that they're good at and that's it, it's going to be a tough area for you. If you need constant praise, don't do it because it's just not going to happen, right? If you need to always have wins, don't do it. If you think that, this is a hard one though, but if you think that your job is going to define who you are, don't do it. Because when it goes down, you're going to go down. So it needs to be, this serves a purpose, but it's not my core purpose. Because if it becomes your core purpose, I know that's why I say it's a hard one, because a lot of people think you're supposed to live and breathe. I just believe it's just like having stock in your own company.
Right.
I used to tell people, if your company matches don't put your 401k in your stuff. Because when the company goes down, then your 401k goes down.
Right.
So diversify. Right. And I'm saying diversify joy. Right. Don't have your joy wrapped up in that same thing. Find other ways to have joy. So if that's the only way you can find joy, I don't think it's a healthy thing for certain, and I still don't think it's the right thing for you as well. But those are the ones that come to mind.
I see. And I guess the other side of that question would be, to whom would you recommend this career? And maybe you can also tie it to what you were thinking when you began, and what were the misconceptions and what were the surprising good things about that you enjoyed?
So you have to certainly be a person who, I always used to say that we are really good at seeing risks and not seeing uncertainty. So when we look at uncertainty as just human beings, uncertainty means that. It could be positive, it could be negative, right? But we look at uncertainty and we're really good at seeing the downside, and it's hard for us to see the upside. That's just kind of the way we wired. And I guess if you're in a cave and you're worried about going out and something might eat you, you should be worried about the risk, right? There's an uncertainty that you might go out there and someone might give you flowers, but there's a really good chance something might eat you. So I get why it's kind of wired into our DNA. And so my thought is you really should be a person who sees uncertainty, that sees upside and downside, not just downside. Because if you're only looking at downside, it's not going to power you through the tough times you have to do. And for me, what was surprising to me was I just thought if you were in a startup and you screwed up once, that's it, you're dead. And I got to realize, you got a lot more leeway than you think you do.
Okay.
That it's not as you make one mistake and you die, as I thought it was. That not saying, no, there's a whole bunch of stupid people, and we all make dumb mistakes with startups, and it doesn't necessarily kill you. And in fact, it usually doesn't. It's usually something much more macro or much more sustained. Like when you hear the story of BlackBerry and how BlackBerry died, it was like years of doing the same wrong thing before they finally died. It wasn't like they just made that one mistake and Apple's come on and it's like, oh, you're dead. No, they just kept going. They had multiple chances to change direction and they just never did. And that is a key thing that I've learned. Is that I don't say that to get sloppy. I'm just saying, don't think the world is over because you made a mistake in a startup. And, in a big company, it's not going to kill the company, but you think it's going to kill your startup, and it's not. But just be willing to know it's not going to kill it, but you're going to have to put work in.
I guess to summarize, turbulence is guaranteed, but there's a lot more leeway than you think there is.
Right. And always remember that uncertainty has upside and downside. Uncertainty does not necessarily mean only downside, which is what will come to your mind instantly.
I like that. Yeah. It's a very hopeful message. I think a lot of people recommending startups, they always say, if they knew what was going to happen, they wouldn't do it again or something like that. I think the CEO of NVIDIA also said that at one point. And it's very daunting if you hear things like that.
And I have not experienced that in any of my startups. And they've been painful moments. There's no question it's been painful. But I never got to that place of saying I would never do this again. Now, there's things like you might have a partner that's difficult and that might be it. But that's a separate thing than just doing a startup, right? So, no, I've never said that I would not do it because of that. And Fandango was wild, crazy. I go back, I tell people, I say I could write 1 million stories about it because it was such a wild ride. But there's nothing like going someplace and no one knows it. And then you turn on the TV and you see Fandango as one of the apps in the App Store or something on the TV and whatever else. You go, and you started from when no one knew what it was. Right. That's a beautiful feeling. That is hard to match that in anything.
You can't get that anywhere else.
No, you cannot. You cannot. No.
So for one of our final questions, what's one piece of advice you would give someone starting to carve their own path, kind of based on your experience, kind of maybe to start a path similar to yours?
I'd say, this is going to sound trite, but find something you like doing. Really. I don't care if it's programming, it's programming. Find something you like doing and then see how that might be a bridge to the next thing you want to do. But try your best not to do something just to hold space or just to get a paycheck. If your goal, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? Your goal might be, I want to go hike, or I want to climb. That's the main thing I want to do. And I just want to make enough money to pay for my rent, pay for my hiking equipment. If I have a family, pay for my family. But that's it. That's what my job serves that purpose. There's zero wrong with that. That's great. So in that case, you don't necessarily need to do a job you really love because the love is financing your love. So that's why you feel comfortable. You go, I can put up with this because it's financing what I love.
Right.
But if your goal is to build something, love has to be in there. Not your whole thing, like I said earlier, not all of you, but there has to be something in there you like to do, that you get up in the morning and you get jazzed about doing some aspect of it. So find something that if you get to a point you have to pour yourself into it, you can see why you would do it. it's not a waste for you. That's important. And then the other piece is, while you're not constantly, like I said, you want to do that, what you're doing well, you do want to keep in mind the prize. Like, where are you trying to get to? You don't necessarily have to map it out, because I can guarantee you if you map it out, it'll be wrong. But I used to always say this: if you keep in mind where you're trying to go, in the moments you least expect it, your mind will tell you ways to get there. You don't have to overthink it. You just have to keep it as part of your, not like a drumbeat, but just in your consciousness. I know this is where I want to go. And there'll be moments you will be dreaming, you'll be riding a bike, you'll be swimming, you'll be sitting on the beach, you'll be on vacation, you'll be on a flight, and you will go, oh my goodness, yes.
To kind of summarize what we learned today, I think being purposeful with your decisions, I think searching for impact and increasing scope. I think also learning what you're passionate about and really finding the field that you want to work in. I think those are really important. Also to have the courage to jump to a different company, jump to a different field.
But just have purpose in mind.
Have purpose in mind.
And know why you're doing it. And we talked about this earlier. Always remember, time is part of the decision. Time is not an extraneous piece. Time will help you make a decision.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
No.
Really appreciate your time
and
thank
you. It was fun.
Your insight. I think it's going to be a great episode. And yeah, we hope to have you on the podcast again at some point. I know there's a lot more to Fandango that we would like to get into. So
sure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. You made it easy.